Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're exploring something absolutely fascinating. We're going to look at how a 2,500-year-old philosophical framework can actually serve as a highly logical, highly practical blueprint for the modern mind. Seriously, think about it. We live in a world where we're constantly walking around with literal supercomputers in our pockets, yet so many of us still feel completely lost. If you've ever felt like modern life has a million answers for the hows, but nowhere near enough answers for the whys, well, you are definitely in the right place. Let's jump right in and see exactly how our source material tackles this.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our rational inquiry for the day. First up, the modern existential dilemma. Second, rules of spiritual freedom. Third, the middle way blueprint, followed by rethinking cosmic justice, and finally we'll wrap up with the living tradition.
Starting off with Section 1, the modern existential dilemma.
So we live in an era of just unimaginable scientific triumphs. Science, technology, modern psychology, they've completely transformed our physical world and dramatically widened our intellectual horizons. We're putting rovers on Mars, we're instantly communicating across the globe. It's incredible. But, as the source material points out, all this breathtaking technological progress suffers from a really profound limitation. It simply can't tell us why we are here. There is this fundamental lingering friction between our absolute mastery over the physical universe, the how, and the void of existential meaning, the why.
Which brings us to a very relatable question. What actually happens when our intellect completely outpaces our purpose? The texts suggest that a human being who fails to observe any moral or philosophical principles risks becoming a real danger to society. Think of humanity right now like a high-speed sports car driving with absolutely no steering wheel. We've got an incredible amount of processing power and speed under the hood, but literally zero direction. Without an existential anchor, we risk being driven purely by unchecked impulses and material desires. So, the crucial point is this. The text argues that an intellectually mature person requires a framework, basically a complete religion in its truest, most functional sense. And to actually work today, it needs to fulfill dual needs simultaneously. First, you need an existential anchor to clearly explain life, the roots of suffering, and the path to genuine happiness. Second, you need a psychological and social compass that harmonizes the individual's mind, which in turn fosters global peace and community cooperation. According to the source, it's got to provide deep meaning, but it also absolutely has to satisfy the analytical mind.
Moving right along to Section 2, Rules of Spiritual Freedom.
Before looking at our specific case study today, the source material lays down some non-negotiable guardrails for any valid spiritual system operating in the modern world. The text emphasizes, and this is key, that true spiritual and philosophical paths cannot coexist with force. A genuine investigation requires three main principles. First, there can be zero exploitation of poverty, illiteracy, or raw emotion to induce conversion. Second, preserving human dignity means flat-out rejecting blind dogmas or supernatural scripts that demand belief without personal understanding. And third, you need the absolute liberty to test these teachings against reality. The framework asserts that humans possess natural intelligence. We need proper guidance, sure, but we must be allowed to ask the tough, challenging questions.
That brings us to Section 3, the middle way blueprint.
Now, what's really interesting is how this applies to our primary case study, the 2,500-year-old teachings of Gautama the Buddha. Our source material frames him objectively, not as some mythical, untouchable deity, but as the supreme scientist of life. It presents a highly practical educational system for mental culture rather than a system of blind, unquestioning faith. The text points out just how actionable this core mandate is, functioning almost like a progressive psychological protocol. Step 1. Abstain from all evil and bad deeds. Step 2. Cultivate goodness and wholesome actions. Step 3. Purify the mind. It's laid out as a very direct system designed specifically for the thinking, rational mind to follow.
Breaking down the mechanics of this, which is known as the Noble Eightfold Path, the source divides it into three distinct dimensions. First, you have wisdom, which includes right understanding and right thought. Then comes ethics, encompassing right speech, action, and livelihood. And finally, mental discipline, which is right effort, mindfulness, and concentration. The text uses this exact structure to prove that the framework is a comprehensive ethico-philosophical path. It's a daily practice, rather than just a dusty set of metaphysical rituals.
Section 4. Rethinking Cosmic Justice.
So, we've looked at personal ethics, but how does this highly logical framework address universal justice and the seemingly unfair nature of human suffering? Let's pause on this incredibly powerful quote for a second. We are the results of what we were, and we will be the results of what we are. This introduces the concept of karma, which is essentially cause and effect. In a rational approach, the source material states that this completely replaces the idea of an arbitrary, judgmental deity or the heavy burden of ancestral sin. Instead, it's a purely logical law of individual responsibility. The core argument here is that man is the sole architect of his own pain and pleasure. You reap exactly what you sow, no exceptions.
So where does bad behavior actually come from then? According to the text, the roots of all our suffering are divided into 3 internal poisons: greed, anger or hatred, and ignorance. The text makes it abundantly clear that evil actions aren't caused by cosmic devils tempting us from the shadows. They are driven entirely by these 3 very human aspects of the mind. And because they come from within, overcoming them requires internal self-realization and mental training. You can't just rely on external pleading or bargaining to fix it.
And this entirely shapes the framework's view of leadership. The ideal teacher is defined by the source as a historical human reformer, relying on persuasion, universal love, and social equality. A rational religion's founder isn't some supernatural myth. They're a model of truth who actually embodies the virtues they preach and who actively works to break down oppressive structures, like the caste system, championing true equality for absolutely everyone.
Let's move to Section 5 and see how this builds into the living tradition.
To bridge the gap between academic, high-level philosophy and the messy, emotional realities of everyday humanity, the text contrasts pure intellect with devotion and ritual. Because let's face it, if a system is purely intellectual, it can feel incredibly cold and detached. While intellect gives a religion its clear, rational direction, devotion and ritual provide the cohesive community bond. The text notes that sure, superficial rituals don't magically save anyone, but shared practices like meditation gatherings or symbolic offerings, they serve as vital psychological anchors. They take this massive, abstract philosophy and make it accessible and comforting for ordinary people who are just trying to deal with everyday grief, stress, and anxiety.
And this brilliantly illustrates the framework's ultimate goal, nirvana. It's defined here as the literal blowing out or cessation of those fires we mentioned earlier: greed, hatred, and delusion. The absolute crucial takeaway for us here is that the text describes ultimate liberation as supreme mental tranquility that is achievable in this earthly life. It is not presented as some physical relocation to a heavenly realm after you die. It is an absolute, unshakable peace you cultivate right here, right now, in the present moment. To actually reach that level of peace, the framework introduces the concept of non-self, or anatta. Now, to demystify this kind of complex idea, it simply means recognizing the fluid, ever-changing nature of mind and matter. According to the text, we don't actually have a permanent, unchanging ego. We are a beautifully complex, constantly shifting combination of energies. The source suggests that truly understanding our shifting nature is incredibly freeing. It's a total game changer. It releases us from pride and that desperate, exhausting desire for world domination, replacing those ego-driven impulses with genuine, universal tolerance. Let's summarize the core thesis of our explainer today. Religion, when viewed in this highly rational context, is defined by the source material as a scientific instrument. It's designed for humanity to cultivate hidden potential and ultimately conquer the mind. It is not framed as a rigid set of commandments to be blindly obeyed out of fear. Instead, it's a progressive, practical way of life meant to help us achieve absolute harmony with all living beings, offering that much-needed why that our highly technical, super-fast modern world so often lacks.
Which leads us right to our final thought. The source material states that virtue is the vehicle that brings humanity to the gates of peace, but wisdom is the definitive key that actually opens it. So, if virtue is the vehicle and wisdom is the key, how will you choose to drive? Thank you so much for joining me for this structured exploration. I really hope the breakdown today gave you some clear, actionable insights into this fascinating framework for the modern mind. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I will see you next time.